Well, now to the theology portion of the class. I've been intrigued because of this dialogue between the end justifies the means and the beliefs of a Christian and as a person and as a Methodist. I've drawn back to some theological position that you don't hear often in Methodist churches, so I thought I would blow the dust off today. Christian perfection. Are you going on to perfection? John Wesley came up with this concept that we all go on to perfection in this life. Well, everybody feels a little like we want some wiggle room on that word perfect, to be perfect. But he wrote in this tract called A Plain Account of Christian Perfection. The first tract I ever wrote expressly on this subject was published in the latter end of this year. That none might be prejudiced before they read it, I gave it the indifferent title, The Character of a Methodist. In this, I described a perfect Christian, placing in the front, not as though I had already attained. A Methodist is one who loves the Lord his God with all his heart, with all his soul, with all his mind, and with all his strength. And then he goes on to say, by perfection, I mean the humble, gentle, patient love of God and our neighbor, ruling our tempers, our words, and our actions. As to the manner, he writes, I believe this perfection is always wrought in the soul by a simple act of faith, consequently in an instant. But I believe a gradual work, both preceding and following that instant. As to the time, I believe this instant generally is at the instant of death, but I believe it may be 10, 20, or 40 years before. As Methodists, are we going on to perfection? Well, then on occasion I crack open the Book of Discipline. Some of you know that that is the rule book, if you will, the canon law of the Methodist Church. And in there we have our doctrinal statement. And so I found an updating of sanctification and perfection, and it reads, we hold that the wonder of God's acceptance and pardon does not end God's saving work, which continues to nurture our own growth in grace. Through the power of the Holy Spirit, we are enabled to increase in the knowledge and love of God and in the love of our neighbor. New birth is the first step in this process of sanctification. Sanctifying grace draws us toward the gift of Christian perfection, which Wesley described as a heart habitually filled with the love of God and for neighbor, and as having the mind of Christ and walking where he walked. This gracious gift of God's power and love, the hope and expectation of the faithful, is neither warranted by our efforts nor limited by our frailties. Do you want a New Year's resolution? Go on to perfection. In the future, someday, soon, Pastor Sandy will kneel before the bishop. And there will be several questions that have been asked of every Methodist preacher since the time of Wesley. Are you going on to perfection? And we say, by God's help, we are. I am. Do you earnestly expect to achieve it in this life? We say, yes. And then the final one is, are you earnestly striving after it? We say, yes, with God's help. So today, in kind of me ordaining you all, sending you into 2015, I ask you, are you going on to perfection? The answer is yes, with God's help.
Yes, with God's help.
Do you earnestly expect to achieve it in this life? The answer is yes.
Yes.
And are you earnestly striving after it? With God's help, I will.
With God's help, I will.
Amen. Let us prepare our hearts and minds for the sacrament of renewal, the sacrament of Holy Communion.